for a second. We have Victoria Ray Sook of Food of Love Productions, and we have Linnea Benson of Frog and Peach Theater Company. So they'll all be joining us tonight. And as a matter of fact, I think I see Alicia Espinosa is already here. Let's see if I can figure out how to close this out and invite her to join us. Okay, Alicia. So Alicia, I will ask you to jump on for a chat. Hi, Alicia.
Hi, did I do it? Is it working?
It's working for me. Is it working for you?
It is. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. It's raining here, so it's very peaceful.
Where is here? Where are you?
I'm actually taking a little break from New York. I'm in the Poconos right now, so not very far, but taking a little break to the country.
Okay. And are you from New York originally?
You know, I'm actually from here originally. This is where my parents are. But they grew up in New York, and I, promptly returned when I grew up and got old enough to go back. So I'm sure they find that hilarious.
Okay. So at what point did you, in your development, did you decide that you wanted to pursue Shakespeare, that Shakespeare was your main interest?
That's so funny. I was just listening to your story about how you discovered it. And I guess I have a similar story. I remember wanting to be a singer and then an actor first. And one of the first things you learned, at least when I was looking for monologues in the late 90s, early 2000s, as a Black woman, was that it was hard to find roles or monologues that I liked. So what first drew me to Shakespeare, I think, was the fact that I could look at the character context and there were no descriptions. I think that's probably why I stayed away from the histories for a while, but I'm learning to love them now. But there were so many roles that I was like, I just love the words here. And it doesn't matter what I look like. I can perform the words if I want to.
And that's something that's really, really amazing about Shakespeare, is that it's such a, I mean, there's a reason that he's considered one of the greatest playwrights, if not the greatest playwright in Western literature, is that the plays are so universal, and there's so much room for interpretation, so much room for discovery in those roles, that at this point, I don't know if I've seen just a straightforward old school style Shakespeare production in New York in I don't know how many years. To the point, I don't know if you ever read the satirical newspaper The Onion.
Oh yeah.
In The Onion, I think one time a year or two ago, there was a jokey article about how director stages a straightforward production of Shakespeare. Everyone's shocked or something like that. So,
yes. I've also seen the one that's like, director stages Hamlet in space, something no one's ever thought of before.
Right. It's been done in so many ways, and so, and when I was coming up in the Shakespeare scene here in the, I'd say, not to date myself, but in the late '90s and early 2000s, it was just kind of the beginning of the era where colorblind casting was becoming the norm, as opposed to something that people kind of grudgingly did. So I don't know if what was your experience with that? You talk about how you struggle to find those monologues or those roles that fit you once you delved into them. How did the casting process go for you?
Yeah, that's also such an interesting part of as far as myself as an actor and a writer, my evolution and my relationship to Shakespeare. Because at first it seemed like an avenue that I was like, anyone can play, right? And then as I grew as an artist and as an actor, you do start to realize where that responsibility is, right? Because if you honor the context of where it was written and who wrote it, there is a truth you have to acknowledge, that it wasn't written for you. You were not in mind.
Right.
So that responsibility that lays at the feet of casting directors and directors when you decide, and I think rightfully so, to expand the world to reflect our world, because Shakespeare was throwing anachronisms all over the place. He was expanding his world and his historical context to fit his peers and the stories he wanted to tell. So we should feel free to do the same. But I think the public's production of Much Ado, oh my goodness, was that only last year? 2 years ago?
That was last year.
That was last year. Goodness. I think is one of the best examples I've seen, and that most people probably have a context for, of really respecting the bodies that you put on stage and their history and what they bring and can bring and should bring to a specific role, as opposed to what I think happens a lot. I know this was the trend in a lot of acting training, kind of trying to strip people of their regionalities of the things that make them unique. Oh, we have to do this very specific Americanized, heightened American accent to do Shakespeare. And it's nice to move away from that, to really embrace, if we're Americans doing Shakespeare, what makes us American and why are we doing it?
Right, and that's a good point. So where did you do your studies?
Oh, sure. So I did undergrad at Lemoyne College, which is up in Syracuse, good Jesuit school. I got 2 degrees from there. And then I went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City for my MFA in acting and directing.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah.
And from there, I was looking at your resume. I was looking at your website, and I saw that you spent a good amount of time with the Kentucky Shakespeare Festival. Is that right?
I did. I really love that festival. They're great people. Matt Wallace is a great director who also is working towards casting equity in every way. And this is another struggle that happens with casting equity. I sort of hit a lot of the intersectionalities as a Black Latinx woman. The casting Shakespeare, you're never going to get away. The old grad school joke is, well, a grad school class only needs 5 men and 3 women, because if you're going to do a Shakespeare, you only need 3 women. So we don't need more than 3 women.
Right.
So when you're looking at casting equity as a Shakespeare company, where does that responsibility lie? Is it in gender bending? Is it in acknowledging it? And then that's not even touching respecting the LGBTQIA community. You know, where do non-binary folks fall into a very binary world of Shakespeare? How do we navigate continuing to produce it in a world that is so much more complex?
You know, it's such a funny thing because, you know, in our day and age, you know, that's our struggle, is we're trying to figure out whether the gender norms of male and female, how do we figure that out in our current day and age with the current, you know, cultural situation, as in terms of how it relates to Shakespeare. But in Shakespeare's day, that was almost a non-issue, in the sense that he didn't even have female performers. Female performers were a no-no. He had young boys playing all the female roles. So in so many of the plays, in As You Like It and Twelfth Night and whatever, where the girl is masquerading as a boy, you have all that layering of the young boy masquerading as a girl, masquerading as a boy, and all the romantic follies that then ensue therein. So at what point after you did your schooling did you get to the New York scene?
Oh, I graduated in 2015 and I came straight to New York. So I've been here, it'll be about 5 years in the fall.
Okay.
Sort of going at it.
And who were some of the companies that you've worked with in New York?
Okay, so I just sort of finished working with the Classical Theatre of Harlem, but our production got interrupted by COVID-19.
Okay. So talk to me about that, because for me, that has been one of the most fascinating things that, since I've been a fan of Shakespeare, is that, you know, throughout all the decades, you know, the motto has always been, the show must go on. You know, the show must go on. And then you reach a certain point where, just for public safety, you know, a situation arises where show can no longer go on. So what was that process like? What was the process of putting that show together like with the Classical Theatre of Harlem, who are a fantastic troupe, and what was the process like of making the decision to put it on hold?
Yeah, so I mean, mostly blessed to be working with such a lovely, warm, and generous company, because we were in our first week of rehearsal when things were sort of starting to seem a lot more serious. And I remember the last day we had of rehearsal, we all kind of felt it in the air. Ty Jones came in and spoke to us. And of course, our director, Peter Francis James, had spoken to us as well. And they were saying, listen, we have to wait.
I'll just pause you for a second. For anyone who might not be aware, why don't you just tell us who Ty Jones is?
Yeah, Ty Jones is the artistic director of Classical Theatre of Harlem. Also,
he is Classical Theatre.
He is Classical Theatre of Harlem.
Right.
Magnificent man who's really just the force behind it. Basically still being alive,
actor,
performer.
Right, everything. He's
stunning
he wears
producer.
all hats there. Right,
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so
Yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. So if people who know him are like, yes, of course he would handle this well. And we were having conversations all week about, listen, the production we were doing was a part of a festival at the Kennedy Center. So we were at the whim of the Kennedy Center. Whatever they decided, if they were going to cancel the festival, we were going to cancel. We also did, at that time, have sort of like a carrot on the stick, though, because we were also supposed to remount it in July at the Caramore Festival.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which unfortunately also got canceled. But
Right.
we were you know, we're still in contact with Peter Francis James. And I think for a lot of us, it's bittersweet, but I think at least the actors I speak to, my partner and I speak about this a lot. You can't act 6 feet social distance. And I want to be safe. I want other people to be safe. So as sad as it is to sort of be in this time period, I've kind of accepted it'll take a vaccine before we can really do what we love to do the way we love to do it. So
All right,
it's sad, but you know.
I have to switch over. My phone is running low. I'll switch over. I'll go with it. Can you hear me okay now?
I can, yeah.
Okay. All right. So now this was this production that you were working on at CTH, Classical Theatre of Harlem. This was your own writing, correct?
No, this was not my writing. Oh my goodness, no. Actually, Peter Francis James, it's a very loose adaptation of Midsummer, and our director worked on it. It was actually a collaboration with the Orpheus Symphony.
Okay.
They called Classical Theatre of Harlem. They were like, we want to do something with the Harlem Renaissance, with you, with Shakespeare. What can we do? And they sort of came up with this really lovely vision of Midsummer, but taking place in 1920s Harlem. So we're all sort of embodying, the costumes are going to be so cool. I cannot wait to get in those costumes. Embodying these archetypes of the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh wow! That's what better place to do that than with the Classical Theatre of Harlem? That's
Yeah.
And you were, I'm sorry, remind me, you were supposed to be, what was your role in that production?
I was playing Hermia, yeah. So I was
Oh,
going to play
goodness.
Hermia. This is my destiny. I'm 5'1". I'm never going to escape it.
That's the perfect role.
Yes. Yes, and we were going to have Duke Ellington's music and, oh my goodness, the great opera, Midsummer Opera, and of course it slipped my mind the name of the composer, but it was a combination of this very classical music and this very like jazzy, lovely music, sort of melding the worlds of classical and Harlem together. Exactly
Now,
perfect for Classical Theatre of Harlem.
how far into rehearsals were you when the decision was made to pull the plug?
We had a short rehearsal period of about 2.5 weeks. So we had gotten through like 4 days, which seems short, but for a short rehearsal period, it was about half of our rehearsal.
Right.
So we were really, you know, raring to go. We were about to get on our feet. I was memorizing my lines when I got the message that we
You got
were
the call.
canceled. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. And you mentioned there was another project that you had coming up as well. What was that one about?
Oh, sure. So I'm currently actually working on a script that's called Prisoner Tongues. It was presented through the Drama League last summer. It's on the New Play Exchange right now, but it is part of my own evolution and understanding of the place of Shakespeare in my life and my place in Shakespeare. It's a feminist, Black Latinx deconstruction adaptation of Much Ado and Hamlet, sort of based on my experiences of working on both of them. I played both Hero and Ophelia.
Okay, well, that's two very different types of show. You have, very high comedy, and you have total dark tragedy. So, how do you reconcile those two worlds?
I think because of solely my influence of playing Hero, to me, Much Ado, while couched in outrageous comedy, that second act, well, the second act that people make it, it's really like the third, fourth act, is a tragedy, is just this deeply felt tragedy that I don't think gets as much respect as it deserves for Hero's perspective for a couple reasons. One, the practical one, Hero doesn't have very many lines. But I think maybe some less practical, that bringing a perspective that centers the female characters in Shakespeare's plays is sort of necessary. So that's more of what I focus on in the adaptation of the two, sort of juxtaposing this idea of, if you're a contemporary woman working on this play, what's the tension for you? And then who would Hero and Ophelia be in those tragedies to us in a contemporary context? What are those characters like? Who are they?
That's really interesting. And that was your writing.
Yes, that one I wrote.
That one, okay. All right. So now, what's the plan with that one? And given that everything is on pause.
That one is going to get cleaned up and submitted to the Yale Drama Series, hopefully, if I get my act together. And yeah, doing stuff like this, telling people about it, putting it on MPX. I think it's perfect regional theater bait, but that's just me.
Well, it's a really exciting thing because, as you said right in the very beginning, there are not enough representations of women of color in Shakespeare, and of course, you have colorblind casting. But the fact that you bring your own experiences in those roles, in Hero and in Ophelia, and you're creating your own construct of what those two worlds look like put together. That's really exciting. When I hear the word deconstruction, that's always like a buzzword for me, because when I hear deconstruction, I've worked with directors over the years who their favorite word in life was deconstruction. And they
Yeah.
would, just take apart a show and put it back together, and the whole thing. So what does that mean to you? The deconstruction is it that it's a nonlinear play? Is it that you're just taking bits and pieces from different things? It means different things to different people.
Yeah, I think actually it's a little bit of both. It is totally a nonlinear play that sort of plays with reality. I jokingly put in the byline, it's two plays within two plays within two play about two plays. So that's, it's very postmodern, sort of playing with our sense of reality. And it is also doing, I think, what we all love to do, which is like, these are the lines from Shakespeare that I think are useful for this moment to emphasize this point. And of course, the language is beautiful. So taking those lines and to me, the deconstruction is taking the lines and crafting them for the new story you're telling, but not diluting their original meaning, really just adding layers onto it to make it richer.
And are you maintaining the structure of the text in terms of the iambic pentameter and all that,
No, that's
or
another
is it a
thing I
more
did.
free form thing?
So part of what I did, I developed this piece at first with the New York Shakespeare Exchange, actually. And it was
Right.
they assembled a cohort, they called it the diversity cohort of writers. And their challenge was, imagine verse. What does verse mean to us? Can you write a play in verse? So part of the other thing I wanted to play with regarding Shakespeare and his use of language and verse was this idea that to him, iambic pentameter was colloquial. So could I use colloquial verse, especially the verse and the sounds and the cadence of various communities of color, and make them verse? Because I think August Wilson is writing in verse just as much as Shakespeare is.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. He's using the tonalities and the rhythm of the speech of his day.
Yeah. So I tried to do a little bit of that.
Okay, well, that's very exciting. So, in terms of the what's happening in society right now, with the Black Lives Matter movement and the whole situation, does that do you feel like that is something that is informing your writing at this point? As your writing changing, as all the coronavirus and all these things start to unfold in society?
Yeah, I think for a lot of writers of color, I will only speak for myself though. I don't want to get in too much trouble. My writing has always been informed by these issues. It's always been about the struggle that I expressed early on of failing to see myself in plays, and we're seeing it more in television and a little more in film, but the theater is always slower to catch up. And I think even in some cases where I see myself, I'm like, this is the least developed character, this is the least interesting, or this is this sort of quote unquote token of strength that we've decided that if we're going to put a person of color, they have to be strong in this very niche way that sometimes lacks depth.
Mm-hmm.
But the current moment is informing a play that I wrote a couple years ago. It was right after Michael Brown was murdered.
Right.
And I am having a conversation with my director. We had a reading of it in January, and from January to now, the play needs to address the moment and the conversation differently. So in that way, I'm being informed. The way we talked about it today was saying that when I wrote the play, the ideas I was talking about, people were still talking around. And even in the play, I was being very gentle with the ideas. But now in this moment, it needs to be bolder. It needs to be bigger. It needs to address the moment in order to stay relevant and hopefully impactful. So in that way, it's influencing my writing in like, okay, where could I have been bigger on the ideas that I'm trying to engage with, and how can I push harder?
Right. Now, for me, Shakespeare's monologues, Shakespeare's speeches, and I kind of come to it in a similar perspective as you have, where when I was getting into the scene and I was starting to look through this monologue books, kind of exactly what you're saying, said early on, is that I didn't always find a character that I connected with. There wasn't always that representation, or if there was a character that I had some kind of emotional or sociocultural connection to, that they were often an older character or a character that wasn't my type, so to speak. So nonetheless, I find a lot of power and a lot of freedom in speaking the speeches that speak to me, whether they're optimally designed for me or not, whether I would be someone that a casting director would look at and say, oh, hey, this guy is the next, whatever, the next layer, whatever the case is. Regardless of that, there are so many speeches that give me power when I speak them, when I rehearse them. Do you think that is something that could be helpful to people that feel like they're voiceless in this era, to perform those speeches, to have an outlet for using those fantastic words to express the feelings that they might not have other words to express?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is something that's sort of been in the cultural, I don't know how to say it, understanding, there's a better word for it, for a while in programs like Shakespeare in Prison, Shakespeare for Veterans. And it's something that I'm doing even when it's not just cathartic. I'm performing a Brutus monologue when I audition, because at this point I'm like, I don't care. I like this text, and you can clearly see that I'm a youngish looking woman of a certain color, so I can do that, and this is the speech I want to do. So all of these things exist for many reasons, just for fun or just because that's what moves you, and you might as well do what moves you.
And isn't that the such a great thing when a casting director or producer, whoever, decides that they want to go in a totally different direction with a Shakespeare production, that not in the as outrageous as Shakespeare, as Hamlet in space, like we were joking about before, but the idea of, like, one of the ones that I spoke about in an earlier episode that for me was the ultimate was, I'm one of my biggest man crushes, shall we say, as a Shakespeare actor, is Patrick Stewart. And I've always had this incredible admiration for Patrick Stewart. I think he's one of the finest actors in the world. And so when I think it was, I don't know, in the early to mid 90s, he did a reverse race version of Othello at the Public in Central Park years ago. I think for me that was one of the most moving things, is to take the issues of that play and just swap something. There were the productions with what's the name of the actress who was Julius Caesar a couple of seasons ago. I forget her name. She's a British actress. She's you know who I'm talking about, right?
I do, and the name is just not coming to my brain right now, of course.
The name escapes me. I know she was in a couple of other really great shows. But anyway, those kind of casting choices, where you take someone who is not what the text originally specifies, if any, in many ways the total opposite, and suddenly that new casting, that new approach to it, that new personage that's part of it, gives.
Oh, someone responded. Harriet Walter.
Ah, that's it. That's the one.
Alyssa,
Harriet
of
Walter.
course.
That's the one. Yeah. Alyssa. By the way, thank you very much to Alyssa May Gold for introducing us. That was
Thank you, Alyssa.
I'm very happy to have you on, Alicia, and thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, absolutely, Harriet Walter, and I think that was an amazing production. So sometimes those kind of things, where someone that is, as I said, not originally intended for that, can suddenly add so much meaning and so much depth, and add light to a role that you've never even thought of. So for you, before we say farewell for tonight, Alicia, for you, what is beyond what you're working on now? Is there something that's like a dream role for you here in New York in the scene? Is there something that you aspire to get to achieve?
Oh, wow. I think at this point in my life, my sort of Shakespeare dream is to be in a production kind of like the Frankenstein that was at the National, where I can play Romeo and Juliet at the same time, like flip-flop nights. And then my non-Shakespeare dream is to just be the star in one of the plays that I wrote, because most of them I wrote for me anyway, because no one was. So they're like my two, like, running parallel train track dreams right now.
That's fantastic. And I think that'd be amazing. And I'd love to see you realize that. A couple more things. One is, it was on the tip of my tongue a second ago. It's given that you've traveled around, you've seen Shakespeare and you performed Shakespeare in different places around the country. Is there for you something about New York that has a very clear definition of what is the style of New York Shakespeare?
Ooh. Oh, goodness. I think the style of New York Shakespeare allows a little more air and contemporary nature. There are Shakespeare companies who really focus regionally on like pace, really moving the text forward, which I think is valid. And then there are other places that really focus on the poetry. But in New York, I often see this play of like, okay, where can we respect the verse and where can we break the verse? And these nuances of who is speaking them influencing a little bit more is usually what I see in New York. And really a desire to sort of shake it a little bit. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but usually people are shaking it.
I think so. I think that's, for me, something that I see in New York that I don't see as much, at least elsewhere around the country. I mean, sure, there are different places around the country that do take liberties with the text and with, interpolating this or adding that or changing this. And sure, that's everywhere. But I think it's more so in New York than anywhere else, to the point where it's almost de rigueur that you have a reverse gender production, a reverse race production, whatever. That text will incorporate a speech from another show or something. It's becoming the fact that just a straightforward Shakespeare it's almost like you have to go out of town for something like that at this point.
And I think it's the nature of New York. I think so many places, I know when I was in Kentucky Shakespeare, like that was the Shakespeare festival. And it felt like their mission and their responsibility. And all of this is valid. I should also preface by saying all these ways of attacking and stylistically dealing with Shakespeare. But their focus is really, this is the one place they're going to get it. Let's give it clean. Let's give it clear. Let's give it like with intention and drive. But in New York, we're all bored and jaded by everything, and we see Stranger Things on the subway. So like if you're not really getting me with something bold or different, I can watch that Shakespeare on BBC with probably Judi Dench or somebody playing the role. So why did I come here?
All right. And I think also it's for me in a way it seems like it's a reflection of the melting pot that is New York. New York is perhaps the most racially and culturally mixed place in the world, as far as I can tell, and it's one of the greatest centers of artistic expression, artistic creation. So it's only a mathematical equation that those multicultural artists will collide and create different kinds of work. What do you say?
Yes, and I think that's part of what we're going to see more of as this catalyst moment that's happening is really reflecting the diversity of the city, because there is about, I think it's a 25% Latinx population in New York City, predominantly Dominican. And where is that representation, especially in Shakespeare, where there is so much breadth and permission to do what you choose and to represent so many different walks of life. I think I'm looking forward to that sea change of really pushing for true multicultural casts. And I'm talking mostly from a Latinx Black perspective, but I'm sure that Asian actors and Mensa actors also have this conversation of where are we in Shakespeare and what is keeping us from being in.
Right. Okay. When do you anticipate getting back on the boards? When do you think that this is going to blow over and when people are going to be back in theaters?
Whew, I'm trying to protect my poor actor heart, and I'm going March 2021. I'm hoping that there are maybe radio plays or things that we can do. I'm very happy right now to use this time to develop my plays, but I'm putting my actor in hibernation. I'm just reading plays and enjoying the opportunity to maybe breathe it out. But March 2021 is my bet.
That's that sounds like a good one to me. Well, hey, listen, Alicia, it's been fantastic talking to you.
Pleasure.
You're doing a lot of great stuff. If people want to find you, where can they look you up?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram at la.espi. So that's at la espi. You can go to my website. I am also the education and outreach director for the Latinx Playwrights Circle. So you can contact us there if you're a Latinx playwright. Get in touch with us, get on our mailing list. And if you just like seeing Latinx plays, get on our mailing list. When theater returns, we'll be back to Latinx Theater Night Out.
And where is that? What's the website for that Latinx theater?
Is latinxplaywrights.com.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Alicia, thank you so much for joining us and for giving us your perspective. And I think you're doing great work. I wish you all the best and hope we chat again soon.
Yes, hopefully we'll run into each other in person in the city. Have a great night.
Sounds good.
Thanks
Take
for
care.
having me. Bye.
All right. So we wrapped up that discussion with Alicia. Instagram Live is a little bit of a tricky thing.